Welcome, everybody. We're happy to have you. My name is Linda Abraham. I'm the president and founder of Accepted, and I'm going to be moderating today's panel discussion. I want to welcome all of you to What It Takes to Get Accepted to Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton. I'm thrilled to introduce our two panelists. First, Esmeralda Cardenal, former Associate Director of Admissions at Yale School of Management and Director of MBA Admissions at MSU Broad, consultant at Cardiff Business School in the UK. However, since 2014, Esmeralda has guided accepted clients to acceptance in various graduate programs, including MBA and Masters in Finance, Business Analytics, Data Science, Sustainability, and Public Policy. And of course, she has helped applicants gain acceptance to Harvard Business School, Stanford Graduate School of Business, and Wharton. Natalie Grinblatt Epstein is our second panelist. Natalie has served as the admissions director at Michigan Ross, Cornell Johnson, and Arizona State. She has reviewed over 70,000 applications, interviewed over 2,500 candidates, and has trained nearly 700 admissions directors and alumni volunteers to select outstanding candidates for admissions. She joined Accepted in 2008. That's just about 14 years ago, and has been helping our clients get accepted to top MBA programs, including Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton, or HSW to its friends, ever since. Okay, let's get started here with some questions. Again, please feel free to leave your comments, your questions in the comment window. First question, what does it take to get accepted to Harvard, Stanford, or Wharton? And Esmeralda, why don't you start with that one?
Great. So what does it take? I would say not only a great application, of course, but great stats, great work experience, GPA, extracurriculars, everything, the whole package. You want to be different, fit the profile that they're trying to build for the class, and a little bit more. That's what it takes. I think for Stanford, innovation, creativity. For Harvard, leadership experience. For Wharton, change, ability to create an impact, re-energize. That's what I would say.
Okay. Natalie, do you have to
add just to add on to what Esme said, I mean, you really need a demonstrated record of leadership and impact at all of the schools. So you have to provide evidence that you're going to make a difference in the world because you already have, right? Past behavior predicts future success. As Esme mentioned, the ability to succeed in the program academically, that's really key. Nobody wants to have students on probation. And, you know, you need a goal that you require an MBA education, in particularly a Harvard or Stanford or Wharton education. And I would say, you know, for all three schools, they want evidence that you'll contribute to your peers and the larger community.
Right.
Do you want me to take the individual schools as well, Linda, or?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. So again, just sort of adding on to what Esme said, you know, with HBS, they have a mission for educating leaders that will make a difference in the world. They also call this a habit of leadership. And so this is really kind of key to what they're looking for. I think an additional part of the case method is your ability to really work with nebulous information. With Wharton, it's an analytical aptitude. And with Stanford, again, Esme was saying, you know, you need to have ideas for the future. They're really very forward-looking. And, you know, they want people that can see beyond the horizon. So key to all this is a expression Linda has coined, which is the admissions paradox. You need the ability to fit in and stand out at the same time. So I think those are important. You know, just very briefly, Stanford puts a lot of emphasis on grit and your ability to see, as I said, to see beyond the horizon. What are your great ideas for solving problems? Harvard is looking more for proven leadership and Wharton looks for contributions to the community, how you'll help your peers. And I also think they have an extremely innovative curriculum, and you need to understand it and really tap into what they're thinking.
Esme, do you have anything to add to that in terms of the school, the differences among the schools?
No, I absolutely agree with that.
If I were to summarize it, I would say absolutely that Harvard, the focus is on leadership. For Stanford, I think you have to show that you're going to be a change agent, right? Their motto is change lives, change organizations, change the world. And I think that's a lot of it. And obviously that does not mean leadership isn't a part of it. I think some of these are more nuanced differences. And for Wharton, I think if I had to put my finger on the Wharton difference, it would be a breadth. Wharton offers incredible breadth in its program. And I think it wants to see applicants who present some breadth, not narrowly focused applicants, but applicants who have been in community service and have excelled on the job and have some other interests and maybe worked in small business and in large corporations. I think that appreciation of breadth is a real factor at Wharton, even if it's not so succinctly stated. Well, let's go to another question. Again, visitors, please feel free to share your questions in the chat window. We're more than happy to take them. Now, Natalie, why don't you take this one first? If I don't have what it takes in terms of stats, my GMAT, my GRE, my GPA, work experience, should I even apply?
Great question. So as I mentioned earlier, no admissions committee wants to see their students on probation or having to kick them out. So you do need to demonstrate that you will succeed academically. But you have to remember that averages are averages, right? So if we look at the median, half are above and half are below. So yes, go ahead and take a chance if your stats are really dramatically below. We would need some individual discussion because maybe you need to take some classes or you need to take, a different test. Maybe you took the GMAT and maybe you should switch over to the GRE or vice versa. But I've had clients that have been below average and they stood out enough to be admitted. And I think, if you have the grit to succeed, then go for it.
Esme, what do you have to add to that?
Yes, what I would say is exactly the same thing, that just to put it in more specific terms, if you have maybe 100 points below their posted average and maybe a whole point below their GPA, their average GPA, then maybe this is not the year to apply. Maybe it will be really hard to get in with that much of a gap. That doesn't mean that you should never apply, but maybe you could work this year and strengthen your profile and taking courses and retaking the GMAT, etc. And then maybe next year you would be able to get closer to those averages and apply. If we're talking about maybe 50 points below the average and maybe only half a point below in the GPA, and you do have like very impressive work experience and you add diversity and all of that, then I would say averages are averages, go ahead and apply. So those are things that I would say in terms of,
the stats. I would just add, if you are below average, and by below average, I would say more than 30 points on the GMAT, and more than 0.3 below in terms of the 4.0 scale and the GPA. And you think that your work experience can carry the day and get you in, which does happen. We've seen it happen. We've had clients where it's happened. That's fine, but also apply to programs where you are competitive if you really are serious about getting in this year. All right, we have a question from Mohammed, and he's asking, is it possible to cover all the expenses of study and living by working working part-time? Esme, you want to take that first?
To cover all the expenses of study and living, well, the programs, the full-time, these are full-time MBA programs, so that you're expected to be a student full-time. Normally students do not work while they're going through the MBA program. They might have, 10 to 12 hours at the top. I would say that's what I've seen of some work, but usually they don't work during the time. However, you do get, a really handsomely paid internship in the middle of the 2 years. And then, of course, they increase the salary after graduation. So it is a lot of the students are able to make up, for the lost income for those 2 years by doing that. And of course, I mean, by the within a few years you'll be able to pay that off. But is it work does it work working part-time while doing a full-time program? I don't think so. But unless it is really part-time.
Okay.
I don't know if Natalie wants to add anything.
Natalie, you have anything to add to that?
I'll just tell you about my own personal experience, because I like the day before orientation, I had a panic attack looking at the bill, the Bursar bill, and trying to figure out how I was going to pay off the loans that I had taken out for school. I took out a 10-year loan, but I paid it off in 3 years. So what Esme talks about in terms of, being paid well during your internship and being paid well after you complete school is a given. I mean, you will be on a different trajectory, and most companies will give you a signing bonus. Now, the signing bonuses are bigger in certain industries like consulting, investment banking, private equity, but it's there. The other possibility is that you may qualify for scholarship. So, so that would be helpful to you. And think about the loans, because it may not take you as long as you thought to pay off your loans as I can prove. So I'm glad I made the decision. I don't look back. My dad was absolutely correct and said, invest in your education. I did, and it was the best thing I could have done.
I also want to point out that I believe, I'm assuming, Mohammed, you're an international applicant. We actually just had on the podcast, Carly, could I ask you to post the link, a representative of Empower M, the letter M, and then the word Power Financing, which is an organization that specifically is aimed at international applicants applying to top graduate programs. So you might want to look at their financing options. There are financing options out there. There's also the MBA ROI calculator. And again, I'm going to ask Carly to post a link to that, where you can calculate what your ROI might be on an MBA. GMAT data shows that it's overwhelmingly positive, just on a financial basis. I also have an MBA, and I also would not recommend trying to work while you're, if at all possible, while you're going to business school, even part-time, because you'll miss out a lot of the experience. So anyway, that would be my recommendation. We also have a question here from Will. Let me get back to it. And it is, how much attention do these schools pay to your interaction with the school during the application process? For example, hold on a second. Attending their webinars, contacting their staff, visiting campus, etc. Esme, you want to take that one? And there's another question from Will, and I want to start with Natalie for the other one. So let's go. Sure. Esme, why don't you take this one?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is important to have that, to interact with the schools. I don't think that it is a guarantee admission if you've been, very active in webinars, etc., that it's going to guarantee admission. It is actually more for you, and in terms of the more you know about the schools, the more that's going to help you in your essays and finding out if the school is actually a good fit for you. But it is not really, I mean, I wouldn't do it. Like I usually tell my clients, do your share of webinar attending and networking, but don't let that get in the way of putting together your application, because you don't want to be extremely busy with doing those things and then having your essay suffer, or the quality of your resume, etc., because you were so busy networking. So try to make a balance. Wonderful, visit all the schools, and that will also be it's more for you than for the schools. The schools will really know that most of the applicants, if they are interested in the program, they have done, a good amount of research about that. I mean, if you're going to go through all the trouble, especially for these 3 schools, they know that you have taken the time to research. But it is more for you to really get to know, so that your essays get better, so you really know how to fit in, and you really can address those essays to fit with the school's mission, and really demonstrate that you can fit in.
Okay, Natalie, you have anything to add?
No, I think Esme summed it up pretty well. I don't think, well, there are some schools, I don't think these 3 actually take into account like the number of times you've attended an info session or the number of people that you've spoken with. But there are schools that want to know that. So if you're casting your net beyond Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton, definitely take that into consideration. But it is really valuable for you to attend information sessions, talk to students and alumni, and even faculty.
Mm-hmm. For instance, just one note, for instance, schools like London Business School specifically ask that in the application, and they want to see that you are taking an active role in terms of searching, because to them, that means that there is a higher likelihood, the more things you have attended, the higher the likelihood that you would actually, accept their offer of admission. So there are schools like that, and absolutely right.
I think also the no school is going to admit you just because you went to a bunch of webinars. But if they have 2 similar candidates that they're debating, and one really demonstrated a lot of interest in their program by reaching out, by talking to the student ambassadors, by going to webinars, by going to events, whether online or offline, that's just more likely to be somebody who's going to accept their offer than the person who didn't bother to even visit, to attend an online event at all. So I think that in addition to, as Natalie and as Esmeralda said, these being important ways for you to get information about the school, for you to get the information that will allow you to show fit with the program, there is a probably on the margins a benefit to it in terms of admissions decisions. Mm-hmm. Okay, we have another question from Will. And this is, I'd love your thoughts on entrepreneurs getting full-time MBAs. Aside from Harvard and Stanford, are there other top programs with strong entrepreneurial cultures?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Nat.
Absolutely. Well, I
know.
I think, Wharton has a great entrepreneurial culture as well. But
MIT Sloan.
I worked at 2 schools. Yeah, and Sloan. I worked and Haas. But I worked at 2 schools that people don't necessarily think about for entrepreneurship, who are fantastic for entrepreneurship. Both Michigan and Cornell have an amazing entrepreneurship ecosystem. So look into those schools. And I would also say Booth has a really cool startup center in the Polsky Center. There's a lot of really interesting things that you can do at Booth for entrepreneurship. It's just, honestly, it's a little different being outside of Silicon Valley, but there's Austin. So McCombs is another school to look at.
UCLA and Silicon Beach.
Yes, absolutely.
That's my alma mater.
And the New York schools,
right.
Because of their of the entrepreneurship that's going on in New York, which is, kind of media based, but, still really, really interesting stuff. So I think it would be very dependent on the kind of entrepreneurship you want to do. And, there's a lot of schools out there that are doing amazing things with entrepreneurship. And ironically, the school that's often ranked number 1 in entrepreneurship all the time is Babson.
Yeah.
So, I was going to say that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Esmeralda, do you want to add anything?
I was going to say Babson, it is, it definitely a great choice, and it has been traditionally for many, many years been number 1. And, but a lot of the programs nowadays would have some sort of entrepreneurship center, especially the top 15 programs. So research. I mean, if you're, for instance, if you're interested in, you don't have to be in California for sure, as Natalie pointed out. But if you want to be like, let's say North Carolina, I know that Duke would have something, then Kellogg would have some. So try to search that what other areas besides entrepreneurship are important to you, because nowadays it's not like maybe 25 years ago, Babson would be the obvious choice besides, Harvard, Wharton, Stanford. But now there are very many that have other resources, or even especially including entrepreneurship, that could be attracted to you.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you. Let's get back to some of the questions I prepared. And again, attendees, feel free to post your questions in the comment box. Where do you think test scores are more important, at Harvard, Stanford, or Wharton? Esmeralda, you want to start with that one?
Test scores. I believe, in my experience, I believe that maybe Wharton plays the most importance on test scores, I think. I mean, this is, of course, a matter of opinion. That's what I've seen. They are among the three. They are the ones with maybe a little bit of higher acceptance rate. So I think that they would have, as a former admissions director, of course, you want to still be up in the rankings every time. So you would place a little bit of importance, more than on the GMAT. I think well known is usually Stanford, really the second one to have placed, just because traditionally they are very high on the GMAT score with a smaller class size, with a very small acceptance rate. So that's what I've seen. And the third, I would say, of the three would be Harvard. That's kind of what my experience, what it has been. But I don't know if Natalie, if you would agree with that approach.
I would completely agree with it. And for the reasons you stated, I mean, test scores can hide in a big school, and Harvard's a big school. So, if you show something that's really interesting to Harvard, I've seen applications that are quite whimsical that may not have the best test scores. Those applicants get in. I mean, it's really interesting. If you can provide an essay that's going to be something that really excites them, you can hide your test scores in the sea of thousands of applicants that are applying with super high test scores. They can do that because the class is bigger. And as Esme said, I also believe it's, Wharton places the most importance, and this is based on experience with my clients. So with 14 years of client experience. So I agree with Esme completely.
All right. I would also, even though I posed the question, it was somewhat of a trick question.
Okay.
Because I think that the distinction is insignificant. You got to have a top score. That's all there is to it. Can you possibly get in without a top score if you have a great essay or great story or fantastic experience? Yes, it's possible, but the distinction, the differences among them are fairly minor. So, I think it's a difference in need of distinction. How's that? Now, in this case, I'm going to ask a similar question, but I'm going to take it more. I mean it more seriously, and that is: does the interview count more at any one of the schools, or is it? What are some of the differences in terms of interview? Natalie, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I do think there are differences in interviews.
Oh,
Linda.
yeah.
So if you say there's no difference,
no. There definitely is here.
I really think the Harvard interview is challenging, and it's extremely important. And it can make or break a decision.
Yeah.
I think that is less so for Wharton and Stanford. With Stanford, with Harvard, your interview is going to be with admissions officers. With Stanford, it's going to be with alumni. And usually it's just a nod to, are we making the right decision now that you see this person in this applicant in person, or for the last 2 years on teleconferencing. And Wharton's just a completely different beast. And
Team-based
Esmeralda and
discussion.
I have been working the last, 8-9 years on Wharton's TBD and
Team-based
the
discussion.
team-based discussion. So that is basically, they give you like a mini case that you're supposed to present an idea in a minute and then work with your team to move the team forward to a better idea, better solution that typically impacts the Wharton community. Okay, so you're being observed by students, and it's typically, the students are thinking about, do I want this person on my team? Can we figure that out from this experience? Because their interview itself is 10 minutes, and they ask why Wharton, or why MBA, why Wharton, and if they have time left over, why you? Why would you want? Why should we admit you? So not as much emphasis on the interview itself. Definitely some emphasis on that team-based discussion, but I think the biggest wall to climb is Harvard's when it comes to interviews.
I think Harvard invests the most in the interview.
Absolutely.
Esme, do you have anything to add?
I absolutely agree. I would say that my clients get the most nervous with a Harvard interview. And I'm talking, so in degree of nervousness and anxiety, I would say Harvard first, Wharton second, because of the TBD, because you don't know what to expect. There is uncertainty. I am prepared. How is my team going to be, etc. Am I going to interrupt too much? What if I get interrupted? All of that, you don't know how everybody else is going to behave. And that is the most weight on the of the process. And then number 3 is Stanford, basically because it is an alumni interview. It is, I think, fairly common MBA interview. You establish a rapport with your interviewer that can go well, and it's just a confirmation, like kind of a seal of approval. Everything goes well. But again, the Harvard and Wharton will be the two differences. And definitely, I would say you want to have coaching with that. You definitely want to have a practice. You can't take that lightly. I had a client a few years ago who did the application with me to Harvard. It was winning. She walked in, but she felt, that the interview questions were fairly easy, that she could wing it. And then she went in and didn't get in. And everything else lined up very well, but didn't get in at Harvard because of that. That didn't perform as well in the interview. So I would say it's extremely important.
The big difference also is that Harvard, it's not blind. The interview is not blind.
Exactly.
They see your application. The questions are about your application and about you, and it's rapid fire. And they also interrupt in the middle of you delivering your response, just to see how you
contradict you, and interrupt and contradict you and question you. And not everybody.
Probing. It's a very probing interview again, and they will ask you about inflection points and decisions you've made. They're not, and again, it's with an admissions director. So you have somebody who invested the time in reviewing your application, who's a decision maker, who's taking the time to interview you. They are investing a lot in that part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
And we do the exact same thing when we're preparing our clients.
Right.
Like I read through an application 5-6 times to develop my question bank for those students, for those applicants.
Yeah.
And with Stanford, it's a pretty basic interview. It's usually with an alum who comes from your industry, the industry that you're currently in, or from your geographic location. Yeah. And so there's a common bond there. And as we said, the Wharton interview is completely unique because they do this team-based discussion as part of their observation of you.
Which, by the way, we typically have mock interviews for. We have mock TBDs, which Natalie leads. Okay, let's go to the next question here. AA is asking, what is the full age range? What is the full age range of a class in these full-time programs? I don't think any of us has them memorized, so I'm not sure that. I mean, you could look that up on the class profile for each of the schools, but tell you what, Natalie, you want to just give a
Yeah, I
comment on
mean, I
that?
think there's a sweet spot.
Yeah, and I think it's more defined in terms of work experience than age.
Right, and that's like 3 to 6 years of work experience. So, you know, I mean, it may be 7, it may be 8. I think, you know, when you're getting into the range that you would qualify for Stanford's MSX program or Wharton's AMBA program, that you probably shouldn't be looking at their full-time program. You should be looking at those other programs that they offer. So,
yeah,
Anything
they might
to
have
add?
that higher 40-year-old, you know, in the program, but it is not common. Usually, you know, it is within 3 to 6
Okay, great.
years. Mhm.
Here's another question from Mohammed. What are the other necessary things, I guess, that improve your application, not counting an acceptable GPA at graduation or a good test score in TOEFL? Would you mind pointing out 1 to 2, 3, 1, 2, or 1, 2, 3? What would you say is most important at these schools? Okay.
at each school or at?
I would assume it. I mean, some of them will be the same, or very similar. Obviously, one of the things the same is you have to answer each school's questions when they're very different questions. They're different applications. But anyway, Esme, you want to start with this one?
Other necessary things except the GPA, acceptable GPA, GMAT.
Right.
Definitely your work experience. You know,
Right.
I mean, it is necessary things. I mean, you might have the GPA, you might have the GMAT score, but if your professional work experience doesn't display leadership or initiative or creativity or any of that, then, you know, oftentimes you would be out of the running, would be hard to get admitted. So definitely your work experience is extremely important. Not only the quantity, but also the quality. And I would put an emphasis on the quality of the work, I would say. Your extracurricular activities, community service, any volunteer activities, what you do when you're not working. You know, they don't want a one-trick pony. They want somebody that is involved in the community, that has done other great things. I would say that, and I would say maybe the variety of interests, or how well-rounded you are, other languages that you might speak, anything else. If you're interested, do you play the cello, do you have a little business on the side, anything else that, you know, any interest that you might have aside from everything else. That's what I would say. Did I miss something, Natalie?
I would just say within the work experience and with your extracurricular community service, you need to demonstrate impact. So I call this my delta. So what happened before you became part of that organization and what happened after you became part of that organization. That impact should be quantifiable. Like, how did you solve problems for this organization? Or for an individual, if your extracurriculars like mentorship or tutoring. But it's really, you know, about impact, because they're going to look for impact at work after you leave. So I think that's extremely important. And I think there's some like characteristics that all of the schools look for. I think I mentioned it earlier. I think grit is a really important characteristic to have. So you really need to demonstrate that. And, you know, just a proven track record of success.
Sounds good. I also think a goal, that's something that we talked about earlier, that requires the MBA from that particular program. Stanford, and I believe Wharton also specifically ask, how are you going, you know, why Stanford, why Wharton? Harvard does not ask that at all, at least not in the application. It might ask it in the interview.
Well, they
sometimes
ask it in the application, but it's a short answer.
All right, it's a short answer. You're right. You're right. You're right.
350
That's
characters
the
or something.
yeah. Right. It's very short there. So you know, that's something I think that's also very important. A well thought out but ambitious goal that school can help you achieve. I think that's also really important. Now we have a couple of questions coming in. This is from Eric. He actually has two questions. He says, I'm unsure which application cycle to apply. He graduated in 2020. He had a 6-month internship, 1 year full-time job in consulting, now 4 months into my second full-time job, advised September 2020 versus a 2023 application. That's a tough one.
I think that's so individual. I'd need to look at that impact to tell
Right.
you whether or not this is a good year to apply, or if you should wait another year and really establish yourself at the organization for whom you currently work.
Esme, do you have anything to add on that?
I think the same thing, because remember that your years of experience, they're going to count towards from the moment that you start business school. So it would have been 3 years. If you graduated in 2020, it would have been 3 years by the time you start in September. So I think it is going to be very important, not only, that job that you said you're 4 months into this new second job. What are your plans, and what are you going to be doing this year in that second job? Are you really going to make a difference? Is it something that, is there a promotion coming along that you can foresee? Is there something like exciting projects that you believe that this year are going to be so important? And that is going to determine whether, if the answer is yes, then maybe waiting for those things happening and applying next year will be the answer. If you don't see any changes, if you think that the job is kind of static and it's going to stay like this for the year, then maybe applying with less work experience would allow you. I mean, some of the schools would actually like that, would like the less work experience, because they feel like, the recruiters will be welcoming you, they can mold you, etc. And maybe applying a little bit younger would be better. So it really depends on this coming job that you just took 4 months ago.
Great point. Great point. I'm also going to ask Carly to post a link to a post that I wrote a couple of weeks ago on why I think it's more important to apply earlier than later because of the economic cycle. Now, I also make very clear in that post that you shouldn't be compromising the quality of your application. So I think that goes back to the question of, what are you going to be achieving this upcoming year? If it's going to be a year of tremendous growth, then you might be better off waiting. If it's going to be basically been there, done that, same old, then you're probably better off applying. But I think this is one thing where we really need more information. But anyway, Carly, if you could find when should you apply to grad school, apply now, and just post that link in the chat window, that would be great. All right, we have another question from, I apologize if I mispronounce your name, Imade. I have 4 years of work experience. If I apply round 1 this year, I'll be 2 months into a new job at a FANG, company. Is it okay to still apply, or is it a red flag to apply so early into a new job? Esme, you want to take that one first?
Well, you won't be the first one nor the last one applying so early into a new job. I would say similar to the last job. If you foresee, I think with 4 years of work experience, maybe, and if you want to go get an MBA, maybe you should think about applying this year. I would say, you would have but also again, see how this new job, if you don't foresee, if you think that maybe this new job maybe it doesn't look so good in the long term and that's the whole year, then maybe you should consider applying. And then we can talk about how to deal with letters of recommendation and all of that later, and separately. But that's something that it happens all the time, and I wouldn't worry about that. It could always be definitely you would have to answer that question in the interview. Maybe some of the essays would need to do that, because they will be asking the same thing: what happened, why would you be applying? Hopefully it is something that you can easily explain, that it could ties into your goals, into what you plan to do this year and that new job, and why it makes sense. But I would say it's something that it has been done in the past and it has worked out well. But again, all of those.
Natalie, you have anything to add?
No, I think Esme summed it up really well.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, here's another question from Eric. It's a question about dual degree candidates, especially Harvard, MBA, MPP. Are they truly blind separate admissions, or do they collaborate to cultivate the dual degree class? Advice for this program. Natalie, you want to take that one?
You are looked at separately.
Okay.
So it's pretty.
You have to get admitted to both programs separately.
Basically, you do. You have to stand on your own for both programs. And, if when one school decides to admit you, they may offer the courtesy of telling the other school that we're going to admit you. So, which is something that I did. I would, call the schools if I was admitting a dual degree candidate. But you have to get into both schools with separate applications.
Okay, great. Again, I encourage our attendees to post their questions. Let's talk about the essays. All three schools, especially Stanford and Wharton, their essay questions are iconic. There's been very little change in years. Wharton has tweaked a little bit, but not too much. How do you approach those essays? Is there any one that you feel is particularly challenging? Natalie, you want to start with this one? I think Esme went first last time.
I honestly think the Harvard essay is incredibly challenging.
I think it's incredibly good.
It's a
really good one.
It's a great question, and it's also really difficult because you have no guidelines. It's open.
Now you have a 900-word limit.
Now you do, yeah. Now you have a 900-word limit. That's it in terms of guidelines. Everything else is open-ended. You can talk about whatever you want. Whereas with Stanford, I think a lot of people find the what matters most question really challenging.
Yeah.
I don't feel like it's that challenging if you have the professional and emotional maturity to handle that question. It's not a question where you talk about achievements. It's really, who you are personally and what's important to you. And then, the why Stanford, you have to figure that out too. Like that is, why do you belong at Stanford? What do they have that no other school has that will help you with the future? Why do you belong there? And why will you be better off? Or why will your peers be better off by you being there? Same thing with Wharton. They actually, one of the questions is, why would your peers be better off? Or the community, which means your peers, be better off by having you there. So you need to talk about, your background in terms of, just as I was able to do this, I will be able to do that at Wharton. So you have proof of what you're doing. And then the other is, again, a why Wharton. So it's very similar in terms of approach to Stanford's. Harvard is just so open-ended. And so my clients and I do a lot of discussing in terms of how to approach that. What do you want to say? What's important for you to discuss that you think will really add value to your application as a whole? And, if you're funny, be funny. If you're not funny, don't be funny. If you're whimsical, be whimsical. If you're not, don't do it. So these are things that we help you do. Like we help you analyze how to approach the question. And it's so individual. It's like there's no formula to the Harvard question at all. That's all I can say. I think it's the hardest one to address.
Okay. Esme, go ahead.
I would say the Stanford one. Like I see that the Harvard, because it is open-ended, you could go either way, but with Stanford, what I have found that because it asks you what matters most to you, it is extremely personal question. And not everybody's prepared, like you had said, Not everybody has emotional maturity to answer. So all of a sudden, when you are in MBA mode, in answering about successes and leadership and how you've created impact and all of that, and all of a sudden, Stanford stops you with what matters most to you. And they are not interested in how you have, led teams or this or that. They're interested in what matters most to you. And the easy mistake is trying to get one essay and fitting it into the other one, which then it won't work, because it will look like you are using an oversized shirt and trying it on. Everybody can see that it's an oversized shirt. So it is, that is a mistake that is made trying to fit that in. And what I found with my clients was that the fact that they have stopped and they have to stop. So usually what I try to do is say, when we have a client that applying to the 3, because that's a lot of people, that's what they do. 3 schools, and then the other ones, but then 3 is we start with Stanford one. So we don't have to do that, the other stopping, but we can start that and then the other ones. And that, in my experience, has been able to get a little bit easier. But it's a hard one. It's a hard one. And then, of course, Harvard is making it a little bit easier now with a word limit. I guess maybe they were asked way too many times, what is a good length, and I can't hear you.
There's a lawn blower outside my window. I said maybe they had to read two long essays. They were getting these long essays. They said, enough of this. It's also possible.
Maybe. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, we were editing 8 pages. No, I have to say, having been on the other side, on the admissions side, I would not want to read an 8-page essay, no matter how wonderful it was, when I have like 50 to read that night.
Right.
So,
right.
So I'm glad that they put a word limit on it. But like Esme, I also start with either Stanford or Wharton, which are easier applications to write, because they give you parameters, not just a word count. They give you a prompt that you have to answer. And that gives us enough fodder to think about what you want to write for Harvard. But I totally agree with Esme that you can't squeeze a Stanford what matters most into a Harvard essay. It just doesn't work.
Right. Absolutely not. No.
And
or vice versa. It won't work.
Or
vice versa.
Right. Absolutely.
Right. A couple of thoughts that I had. Again, I love the Harvard question. Whether they should have a word limit or not have a word limit. I mean, I can understand why they'd want one. I think the lack of word limit allowed applicants to demonstrate either good judgment or bad judgment. But that's another question. I think it's a question that should be in the back of every applicant's mind as they're answering the essay questions. Given what the school knows based on your resume and the boxes and all that, what else do you want them to know? What's going to add value to your application as you answer the specific questions posed by the other programs? In terms of Stanford's, what matters to you most and why? I also think it's the most difficult. To me, that's more difficult than Harvard's question. But I think part of the difficulty is saying, well, I value this. Well, okay, when have you acted on that value? How has that value influenced your behavior? It's not just to say, I'll never forget the time I had a client come to me, and there had been some horrific child abuse case in Los Angeles, which is where I live at the time. This was many, many years ago. And I said, well, what's important to you? What you care about? He says, oh, child abuse. It makes my blood boil. And I said, well, have you, worked with abused children? Have you donated money? Have you led a fundraising drive? No, it just makes my blood boil. Well, boiling blood is not going to get you into Stanford. You had to have acted on that value and done something, had some impact, as Natalie and Esme have emphasized. In terms of Wharton questions, just one observation. The question 1 is, what do you hope to gain professionally from Wharton? And question 2 is, how will you use what you learned through that experience to contribute to Wharton's community? One is what you're going to get from Wharton, and one is what you're going to give to Wharton. So it's a nice think about that kind of complementariness, if I can say that. Give and take is really how I think of those two questions. Let me see if there are any other questions from our guests or attendees here. I think there was another one. Nope, I missed it. Nope. Okay, so let me see if I have another question. How can one determine fit with the cultures of these schools? I mean, they're so often talked about, HSW, you'd almost think that they're identical triplets, but they're not. They're really, really different. So how would you discuss the differences between those three programs? Esme, you want to start off with that one?
So I think we discussed that in the beginning a little bit.
That,
of course, there is some overlap. They're very different, but there's some overlap. I wouldn't say triplets. I would say maybe cousins. Right?
I like that.
So yeah. So I would say with Harvard, it's all about leadership. It's everywhere. So it's leadership and impact. Leadership and impact. I would say. Your application needs to be to demonstrate that you have led teams, that you have led people, you have led projects, that you have created an impact. Stanford, it's about being innovative, creative, being able to kind of find a problem and seek a solution that maybe nobody else thought of. And Wharton, what I've seen is re-energizing. It is changing something something that was already there. With Stanford is creating new. With Wharton, the way I see it is re-energizing and changing an organization that was already there. So in each one, you're creating an impact a little bit differently. And how you demonstrate fit, it is not getting one essay and changing the words a little bit to fit the other. It's understanding the core value of what they really want to see and bringing it to them with examples, clear examples that demonstrates that you have the leadership for Harvard, that you have the innovative creativity, initiative, quirkiness of Stanford, and then you have the change, the re-energizing attitude of Wharton. That's what I would say.
Wonderful response. Natalie, you have anything to add?
No, that was wonderful. I will just say that if clients are approaching me with these three schools, and I would say, 80% of my clients are applying to these three schools, I start with a Venn diagram. So with Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton. And in the middle, there are those common things that, as we mentioned, that every school is going to look for. And as she pointed out, you need to look at what the school values. So, again, HBS, I think they look for leaders who can use nebulous information and make decisions, right? A case study, you're given very nebulous information and you need to make decisions with that information. Stanford, these forward thinkers who use ideas and problem solving to make decisions. And then Wharton, I think, uses analytical thinkers who use data to make decisions.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's how I distinguish the three. In terms of how you determine fit beyond what they tell you they value, beyond their websites and their information session, talk to students, talk to alumni, talk to faculty, and ask the tough questions.
Okay, great. Thank you. Now, if I'm can't get into Harvard, Stanford, or Wharton, is an MBA even worth it?
It was worth it to me.
Yeah, it was worth it to me too.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't.
It was it for you too.
Schools, so it's but yeah, I attended Ross. It was incredibly eye-opening. I did not have a business background. Like, I didn't have like an accounting background or finance background when I went there. I worked for a retailer and I was a buyer for a retail store. And so I learned so much about business, but more importantly, I learned so much about me. And I would have not traded that experience for anything. It was the best fit for me. Ross was the best fit for me. So is it worth it? To me, I would say absolutely. For you, you need to make that decision.
Okay, great.
What
Esme,
I
you have
would
anything to
say,
add?
yeah, what I would say is it's for most people. I mean, it's definitely worth it because, okay, you have to look at it. And the MBA is a means to an end. It's a business education. So what you have to look at is what are your goals? What do you want to achieve with that business education? And can you achieve it with a top MBA that is not Harvard, Stanford, Wharton? And the answer to most of the time to that question is yes. And what is the return on investment from going to, I would say the greater top 10, which is, kind of the top 15.
15. Right.
Yeah.
This is the same thing.
It is pretty good. So if you look at it as a means to an end, that is the business education and what your goals are when you graduate, then I would say absolutely you can achieve those goals with an MBA, and it doesn't have to be Harvard, Stanford, Wharton. If that is not your goal, if it's not a means to an end for you, then probably not. But what I would say is that's what you have to take a look into. What is your goal? What is your end goal?
Sounds good. Thank you both. So A has another question here. He or she's not clear to me which gender here. 1-year programs don't have an internship. So to change career, can an international applicant apply to these with 10 to 12 years at the age of 35, 37? EMBA isn't for international applicants who need internship. I guess the question is, are there 1-year programs that can assist an international applicant to change careers? And that answer probably depends what kind of career change you want to make. But I'll let Natalie, you want to take this one?
Sure. So, I mean, I mentioned this before, Stanford's MSX program. I'm sorry if you hear thunder because we're having a bad storm here. But Stanford's MSX program is like an ideal program for people that are mid-career. So if you're 35, 36, it's kind of like low end of mid-career, particularly nowadays when your career might last into your 70s. So, but look at programs like, Sloan Fellows out of MIT, Sloan Fellows out of London Business School. Those are all IMD is looking at a younger candidate now, but IMD would have been another great program. Those aren't US schools, obviously London Business School and IMD, but they, cater their program to mid-career. So 35, 36 years old, that's what I would do. It's not typically ideal for you to go to a 1-year. Oh, Cornell's 1-year program is another one where they do.
Yeah, but does that require a graduate school degree?
It requires
or a CPA or something like that?
Right. A graduate school degree or professional certification like a CFA. Right. So that's another program to look at, or the Cornell Tech program. Mm-hmm. So there are these 1-year programs that are built out for mid-career that I would definitely look at. But a typical 2-year program, probably not. If you need an internship, probably not. Are you going to get an internship that would be valuable at age 36 or 37? Probably not.
Depends on what kind of career change you're going to make, probably also. Carly, we also have a post, if you can find it, for older MBA applicants. Maybe we can post a link to that. Esme, do you have anything to add to this? I'm sorry.
What I would say is, if you have look into what the specific schools average in terms of student average is, because there are programs that are geared at 1 year that are geared for younger applicants, and their programs are geared for older applicants. So I would say that's something that a research you definitely want to take. And it's also, there are the UK schools like, Cambridge Judge and Oxford Said, that they're more geared towards a little bit older applicants, and they're 1 year programs, and you have career changers there. So a lot of the times, I mean, I've had clients who have applied to those programs. International students have gotten in, and they're like 35, 36 to Cambridge Judge, for instance, and they went from, operations management to consulting, etc. And they've been very successful. So if you kind of open a little bit your net, a little bit more, and also research the different schools, you should be able to find good programs to apply.
Great answer. Thank you very much. I hope that helped AA. Folks, you are at a fork in the road now of your professional career. You can, in applying to MBA programs, you can take a do-it-yourself approach or a professional approach to your future. Naturally, I recommend the professional approach. I recommend one-on-one advising for all those questions that we couldn't even touch on here, because naturally here we were talking to a group, and we had to speak to group issues, not individual issues, not your personal issues. But if you engage with Accepted, you can access expertise and experience, like with Natalie and Esmeralda, both of whom are available at the moment to work with applicants to the upcoming application cycle. You can reduce your nerves and anxiety. You can save time. You can optimize your school choice and applications, and you can mitigate weaknesses. That's what you get when you take advantage of Accepted's team of outstanding consultants. We are one of the oldest admissions consultancies out there with highly experienced experts. We have well over 100 years, probably close to 200 years of MBA admissions experience collectively, and well over 50 years just on this call, and have been helping applicants gain acceptance to your target schools since 1994. Let's hear from a couple of Accepted's clients. This individual worked with Esmeralda Cardenal, and he wrote, "I did find out just over a week ago that I was admitted to HBS. Super exciting news. I definitely could not have been successful without your help." Or feedback from a different client who worked with Natalie. "As a Chinese male with a below average GMAT, I got advice from other consultants to apply for lower ranked schools. Natalie is one of the very few who believe that I actually have a shot at M7. I almost gave up hope for Harvard and Wharton, but he was accepted to Harvard and Wharton." And here's another one. "Although I just got admitted to Wharton, I already decided that I will be joining HBS. This is like a dream come true. I already recommended my friends to work with you when they plan to apply. This fellow was also accepted to Stanford GSB with a GMAT score roughly 50 points below any of the school's averages for HSW. He was below it. Now, it's now June. There's time before Harvard's, Stanford's, and Wharton's round one deadlines to work with us. Contact us ASAP, take advantage of the current sale, and we'd be happy to help you from scratch or review and edit your essays. You can also have a free initial call with us. You can request Natalie or Esme, either one. So at this point, I want to thank you all for attending. I want to thank Natalie Grinblatt Epstein and Esmeralda Cardenal for being fantastic panelists and sharing a lot of their insight and knowledge on this panel. And to the attendees, good luck with you as you apply. I hope you'll consider working with us. You take care, everybody.